Fair Play, a novel by Pete Fisher. Chapter 25, The Big Trip, Part 1. It was the first weekend in August. Martin negotiated the metro to Gare de Lyon. He found the platform and boarded the train to Dijon. There was a phone box in the station forecourt. Martin fed the phone with French francs. Allô? Oui? Bonjour François, ici Martin. Je suis à la gare. Peux-tu venir me chercher? Salut Martin. Je viens. Tu peux attendre 10 minutes? Oui, j'attends. À tout de suite. About a quarter of an hour later, a rickety Renault 4 pulled into the forecourt. François sat grinning at the wheel. He stuck his head out of the window. Bienvenue, Martin. On parle seulement français aujourd'hui, d'accord? Oh, je ferai de mon mieux, François. Martin found it hard to understand François. Now he was at home, he was speaking his dialect at full speed. Martin often had to ask him to slow down and repeat himself. François had invited friends round that evening for dinner. His girlfriend Louise was going to cook. Like François, she stuck to French. Martin had been pretty good at French at school, or so they told him. The problem was that he'd never used it. François employed a simple tactic to get the linguistic ball rolling. He fixed Martin a stiff Ricard. Diluted with water and chilled with plenty of ice, it tasted nice, but deceptively harmless. It was a great way to loosen Martin's tongue and tame his inhibition. By the time the dinner guests arrived, Martin had downed several glasses and was feeling distinctly jovial. He still felt like he was drowning most of the time. Everyone seemed to speak too fast, and all at the same time. It got worse the more bottles of wine disappeared. François and his friends were all speaking their regional dialect. In the end, Martin realised no one gave a shit how bad his French was. They were glad they didn't have to try and speak English. He felt pretty rough the next morning. The Ricard and the wine had taken their toll. He gave François and Louise a big hug after they dropped him off at the station. Merci de m'avoir invité. C'était très sympa à vous. À bientôt. À bientôt, Martin. Martin settled down in a window seat for the 5-hour ride to Zurich. Having dragged his baggage across 2 major cities the previous day, his romantic notion of travelling on trains was wearing thin. He'd packed way too many clothes and should have left the guitar at home. At least he could get some sleep on the way to Switzerland. He dozed off and missed most of the scenery. Luckily, he woke up as the train slowed when it got to the outskirts of Zurich. It was around 3 in the afternoon. By then, he'd slept off the worst of his hangover. Daniel was waiting at the end of the platform. He was in his early 20s, with a shock of curly fair hair and a cheeky grin. Hi Daniel, good to see you. Hi Martin, we go for a drive before we meet my parents, okay? They went outside to the car park. Daniel's potent Polo GT40 was waiting. It was a 21st birthday present from Granny. Daniel drove them up to a rather desolate but quiet industrial waste ground overlooking the city. He parked up and turned the music down. He got a newspaper from the back seat and a large road atlas from the glove compartment. He also fished out extra-large cigarette papers, cigarettes, and a bag of weed. Using the newspaper as a cone-shaped mould, he formed a very large hollow joint, which he then filled with tobacco and weed. Daniel closed the windows and lit up. He passed the super spliff to Martin after the first toke. Martin took a couple of hits. Jesus! They only smoked about a third of the party cone. Daniel put it into the ashtray to go out. They both sat there for quite a while without saying a word. Totally stoned. Daniel grinned and reclined his seat. Martin wondered how he was going to manage to drive. He guessed he was used to it. Daniel sensibly waited until the weed had worn off a bit while they enjoyed the high-end sound system. When they started to drive down to the city centre, Martin still felt completely blitzed. He hoped his eyes weren't too bloodshot. The house was a modern and very spacious luxury bungalow with a massive garage at the end of the entrance drive. Expensive-looking exotic plants sat in pots around the front door. At the back, a swimming pool glistened in the early evening sun, surrounded by a lush, expansive lawn and colourful flower beds. Daniel's mum produced a tray of glasses and a bottle of champagne. She led the way out to the terrace by the pool. Martin was still really stoned. The champagne went to his head. Life was good. Daniel's mum said dinner would be ready shortly. The next morning, the plan was to go to the house Daniel's parents had on Lake Zurich. His mum and dad had left early. Around lunchtime, his dad phoned, and Martin heard Daniel laughing. Daniel took Martin into the garage, where he was astounded to see a whole collection of expensive vehicles. Daniel said his dad had asked him to bring the Ferrari. It was a brand new Testarossa convertible. Daniel drove the car up the ramp to the driveway and put the top down before they set off. "We should have a drive around town and wave to the girls, okay?" Martin didn't argue. He could hardly believe he was riding around in a supercar. As they got out of the city onto a short stretch of quiet open road, Daniel put his foot down. The car rocketed forward with a spectacular throaty roar. Martin's head snapped back suddenly into the headrest, and the acceleration pushed him back into the tight-fitting seat. He had the window down and his bare arm resting casually along the door, right next to the air outlets. He quickly pulled his arm in with a yelp of pain as the blistering hot air scorched his bare skin. Daniel laughed. He slowed the car back down to within the speed limit. From their luxury speedboat, a little way out on the lake, his mum spotted the red Ferrari arriving through binoculars. His dad piloted the boat into the mooring, and Daniel and Martin climbed on board. "Hast Hunger, junger Mann? Wollen wir jetzt Mittagessen?" "Ja, gerne." Martin answered yes to hungry and lunch. Swiss German was hard, but he got the gist. They cruised out to an exclusive lakeside Italian restaurant on one of the small islands and moored the boat next to other equally expensive-looking craft. On the way back, Daniel and Martin lounged on the front deck, watching the sunset. There was a knock from under the small hatch right next to them. Daniel opened it, and his mum popped her head out. She held up a tray with 4 gin and tonics with ice and lemon. They all roared with laughter. Martin felt spoilt by such heartwarming hospitality. These people had money, but they knew how to enjoy it. More importantly, how to share it. The train to Milan went through some spectacular alpine scenery. Martin looked at his watch and worked out they would soon be crossing into Italy at Chiasso. He didn't think anything more of it. He went down the corridor to the toilet. He was just about to wash his hands when the train stopped. He carried on. Before he had time to finish drying his hands, there were several sharp raps on the toilet door. Dogana! Passaporto! Viene fuori! Martin realized that the man wanted him to come out of the toilet. He opened the door. The nozzle of a revolver was pointing straight at him. Passaporto! Pronto! The border guard in military fatigues was extremely pissed off. He repeated his demands for Martin's passport. Martin tried to explain that it was in his bag in the next carriage. He pointed in that direction. The soldier pushed him roughly down the corridor, still pointing a gun at him, while another guard went ahead. Martin saw through the window that a small group of border police outside seemed to be peering intently beneath the train. He got to his seat and reached up for his bag. He unzipped it and rummaged through the contents to find his passport. The guard seemed satisfied and returned it, but still looked angry. Martin flinched at his parting insult. Schemo inglese. Martin did feel really stupid. By now, the other passengers were all staring at him, wondering exactly what kind of criminal he was. People were getting impatient. Finally, the train shuddered into motion again. Martin sensed a collective sigh of relief. A friendly Italian man sitting opposite explained what had happened. If you are in the toilet at the border, they think you put drugs away. That's why they point the gun at you and look under the train. You're lucky they didn't take you away. The man illustrated his point by putting his wrists together. Martin knew all about handcuffs. Lara met him at the station in Milan. She was probably one of the most stunning-looking women Martin had ever encountered. He noticed she'd had her dark brown hair cut shorter, a slightly boyish bob, making her lovely grin even more impish. She had beautifully pronounced cheekbones and endless legs. She was wearing the tightest pair of short shorts in the shop, topped off by a loose-fitting white t-shirt. Martin gave her a friendly hug, wishing it could have been a lot friendlier. Ciao Martin, come stai? Tutto bene Lara, grazie, e tu? Bene, grazie, che bello vederti. Martin was really pleased to see her again too. He wished he could manage more than tourist phrasebook Italian. Lara's English was pretty good. They spent that scorching day taking in all the Milan sights, the cathedral and the castello. Martin had to tread on the Torino's mosaic balls for good luck. Lara had great fun explaining. They had a great meal of seafood pasta that evening in a restaurant by the canal. Both of them got bitten to death by mosquitoes. Lara nobly let Martin sleep on the floor in her little bedsit. They talked for hours until they finally fell asleep. Luca's sunglasses glinted in the midday sun. He was standing, leaning on his Golf GTI, in Grosseto station forecourt, smoking a cigarette. He spotted Martin coming towards him, carrying his bag and guitar. Ciao Martin, come stai? Tutto bene? Martin put his baggage down and gave Luca a hug. Ciao Luca, è tutto a posto. E buono. Now we can drive to my place. Luca lived in a little port and beach resort on the coast of southern Tuscany. His dad was a partner in a chain of high-class hotels located across the region. Luca was a tall, dark, good-looking guy in his early 20s. He and Martin had hit it off and hung out together during both Luca's visits to England. Martin had been in the car with Luca in England, but there Luca had always taken it easy. Back home, driving on the right, on Italian roads, Luca didn't hold back. The car was quick. Luca did a few overtaking manoeuvres that made Martin grip his seat nervously, but he was a good driver. In Italy, driving up close behind the car in front, flashing headlights and hooting seemed standard practice. Luca also swore prolifically during their 20-minute journey. Martin picked up a few new swear words. They arrived at the picturesque little port and drove up a narrow, winding road that took them up to the cliff top. Luca had his own luxury apartment high up on the cliffs. It had palms in the garden, which overlooked the marina and the rocky bay. The bathroom was of the very best marble, with gold-plated fittings. The other rooms were furnished with what were probably priceless antiques. Martin had it all to himself. He slept on the biggest bed he'd ever seen. Luca's luxury pad was amazing, but there was nothing in the fridge or in the kitchen cupboards, not even a coffee machine. It was already about 10. Martin had a shower in the royal bathroom and put on a fresh t-shirt. The heat that first morning was incredible. He jumped onto the mountain bike Luca had lent him and headed down the hillside track. It led from the villa to the beachside restaurant. There he was to meet Luca for his first espresso of the day. He was glad of the shade in the woods. It was magic. The scent of pine trees, the crunch of the pine needles under his tires, the sound of cicadas all around. Bella Italia. Luca introduced Martin to the chef. Martin was to be given whatever he wanted for lunch every day. As part of the counter, they had a rowing boat laid side on. It was filled to the gunwales with the catch of the day, laid out and glistening on ice. Luca showed Martin the hotel disco, a spectacular smoked glass pyramid construction on the beach. It had an illuminated glass dance floor. Luca was the manager. There was a bar on the patio outside where the barkeeper was stocking up and polishing glasses. Luca introduced Martin and said that his beers went on the firm's tab. Then he took Martin to meet the bagnino. He supervised the beach chairs, handed out fresh towels, and generally looked after things on the private beach. Luca told him to look after Martin. Martin felt like a VIP. It was hot. Martin stood in waist-high, warm seawater. There was a light breeze off the sea. He had a gin and tonic with ice and lemon in one hand and a cigarette in the other. The late afternoon sun was beating down mercilessly. He felt a bit like James Bond. All those elegantly tanned beach visitors around him. He could tell he was several income brackets their inferior. Giovanni turned out to be a lawyer. There were about 20 or 30 equally well-to-do young people wading around Martin. Someone had set up a volleyball net in the water and a game was in progress. The remaining onlookers stood chatting with drinks and cigarettes in their hands. The men all had proper bathing shorts or trunks. Martin made do with his khaki travelling shorts. Most of the ladies had bikinis. They were all good-looking, but they all seemed to be with someone. He chatted with Giovanni, whose English was just good enough. Some of his friends joined in, so Martin had to struggle with Italian. The solution was a combination of both languages and sign language. Everyone he'd met in Italy was so friendly. and the women were so beautiful.